entry to the yard book 2026 for um, the so-called determinism problem. Let's try to ask whether it's legitimate just by posing the question and laying it out to understand Cartesianism as securing the mystical faith in physics as the fundamental science. Usually when we talk about science, the one that seems to be the fundament or the support of the others is physics, because then the standard buildup happens, of course. And hazily, some people add more things on top, such as finally history in the Auguste Comte COMTE version. So let's do it we'll try to paste or superimpose Descartes' extendia substance, the extended thing, onto modern theory. So the extension, let's try to understand in connection, Descartes' version of extension in connection to his wax claim. So he claims, so immediately we could get some superimposition here with the concept of phase changes, which we could neatly apply to, with the extra added one, plasma, I think, since Descartes' day, which we could easily apply to the wax example. Melted wax, wax in a candle, both have extension. All in the gaseous form, I think one could say we're already touching on this sort of Cartesian mysticism, because we think of the material vacuum, and hazily we mix it with the notion of the ideal vacuum. So this discussion between Hobbes and Boyle, we think of something which could be described and therefore having extension in the style of volume as filling a certain area. Volume I take to describe only, as it were, something like a three-dimensional closed figure, which would be the area, which would just be area. But it's totally, because it's numbers, it's totally conceived of as absolutely interchangeable. Just as Descartes had, I think, what he was fixated on was the fact that you could express the colors we actually see in the numbers of the light spectrum. So this made him think there must be some way to have the more secure light spectrum version, which directly becomes mathematics, and we could just forget about everyday experience as less reliable. It exists. That's all he says for it. It surely exists, but it's otherwise unreliable, because it could always be dreaming. We could always be we couldn't tell whether the Earth is standing still or moving, for instance. That's how bad aesthesia are. I mean, these things are, in a way, thoroughly critiqued in the Theaetetus already, but in a way, not in the light of this new method of the mastery of the quantitative over the qualitative. But here's the trick: quantitative is a form of quality. You could think it as a specific quality, and in Cartesian terms, it's distinct. We could separate it from other forms, or from other what we were thematizing when we were talking about Nietzsche and the all these different shapes that cultures could take, which are also different forms. And also with regard to I guess the way Spinoza thinks about it is when he rethinks through Descartes. What he's saying by calling that ethics is that this is just like within Nietzsche, is saying these type of commitments are the ones that are the most serious people will take the most seriously. Because then once Spinoza himself continues this tack, then we're presented with a situation that we can only look at the sort of the matrix version. We could look at the code or the numbers, because that's what everything's pointed towards, as with the light spectrum. And it's numerization. There's always these attempts to make numerical in that way beauty with this fatuous symmetry notion, which has no bearing on reality. It's just something that works in a very rigged way, and then only very roughly, because in other words, they play with the definition of symmetry until they get something which predicts a little better than nothing, and then they say, "Oh, look, we've got it." It's just a theory. It sort of operates within certain very close bounds, but of course it's absurd. I mean, just ask Dostoevsky about the mystery of beauty. It's something different. So let's look at this through. We're asking about determinism, right? So what would it mean to be determined? Apparently we're pointed at things like the light spectrum, or pointed at things that can be mathematized if we're doing physics. But so let me go do something that's close to the this problem with the vacuum. You could think of the vacuum as a plenum, material plenum, where everything in it, you could say, this is how far it is from the true vacuum, or plenum one side, vacuum the other side, and then clearly you're setting up a kind of container, a kind of differing from the way Plato thought of the container. I think. Yeah, because we're simply going on this extension path, on this path of saying all the phase states nonetheless point to extension, including the gas and plasmas in some sense, which gets a little bit confusing. Now let's look at that basic let's just call it, say this indicates there's basic quantums or countable things which fill the plenum. Notice we have sort of the straightforward version, and then sort of like what is space without thinking about it. And then there's on one side fixates the notion of the ideal space, so that it doesn't make sense, for instance, to say that there's an end to the universe when we're thinking just about the idea of space. But it does make sense when we quantify it, and then we say, so for instance, this is what I was thinking of bringing in, is that we say at the time of this 14 billion year old heat event, so-called Big Bang, that the expansion of the universe was far faster than the speed of light. This is considered much less embarrassing now, I think, than it was when this question first became a big deal, because it was still people were holding fast at that speed of light issue. And in some quarters, I think they still are. But it has less hard and fastness to it. So partly because, I mean, not just because of the issue of the quantum entanglement and all that, but also for the reasons that it's discovered there's other reasons to doubt this whole light cone version. But in any case, it was often brought up that how is it that the universe expands faster than the speed of light if the speed of light is the absolute speed, where then things sort of lose mass when you push it to that. That's the end of our measurable ability to measure mass at that. I mean, according to at that time. I think now they tell you there's things measured, but by measured they might mean sort of reliably inferred from a certain data they got off certain apparatuses. It depends a great deal on what their ontological commitments are, what they tell us is real and what they tell us is reliable. It also depends on their personality, like how just their Zen genesis, as it were, pops into their head and they say this is a very unreliable basis. And therefore it's real because it's producing effect in some way. And maybe only in the way of that their prediction is like 10% better than when they didn't have that hypothesis. So you get this claim, how come it could expand faster than the speed of light? And then these Degrassi Tyson type guys, sort of like guys that are good at explaining something that they read in a textbook, like about how why is the sky blue, something like that. That's what Degrassi Tyson type of popularizers are good at. But if he has to say anything, or he has to actually do philosophizing, he can only say something glib. So like he says glibly, because nothing can move faster than the speed of light. But he doesn't really want to think about that. That's the point of the problem with Cartesianism. So, I mean, what they say is space was created. So the first moment that there's not a perfect vacuum is the moment when there's some kind of minimal mass, let's say. Space was created during that so-called heat event. Of course, there's different theories. I'm aware of this, but I'm just saying, according to this one, if you put it in that sort of perfect way, which is more like the way Descartes would demand, and more like Descartes, you could come up with, I mean, Descartes didn't, I don't think, talk about the speed of light being the absolute speed or anything, but it's pretty easy to kind of connect up with this whole way of his grid and all that, and representing things in mathematical style with algebraization of geometry and of volumetrics, if you like. It's totally, he's at ease with that type of stuff. Once you start getting these other theories and so on, then you get to that Einstein point where Einstein's saying, no, this really isn't science anymore. I think that's Einstein's whole problem with this Irish theory of this Irish mathematics of Schrodinger. Yeah, it sort of works a little bit for predictions, but it's not true, and it actually only sort of works a little bit. It takes us into the reasons why the Chinese never got into this thing, the Needham reasons and all that. Refusal of this, because once you get this type of generalization view, then you find out there's cases that don't fit, and then you start making a total mess, like a shape. It was a perfect shape, and then little wormholes come out, then little disgusting, obscene figures start to grow at the edges of it, then it molds over and so on. This is what's happening to the European sciences now. But okay, that's the view I want to say is, if we were talking about determinism in something like the sense of physics, then we're talking about something that has to do with extension or with getting a number, reading a number off a apparatus, or is it then the third thing, which already brings us into total incoherence, which is this Irish Schrodinger equation version of a certain, which only gets a certain predictive power, and however you want to say that that's the way the universe is, so therefore that's the best it could possibly be. Is that really believable? Absolutely not. Of course, there's going to be different physics. There already are since Schrodinger. There's already been many. I mean, that's what that guy with that simple mathematical theorem got the Nobel Prize for a few years ago, is applying a new sort of filter to Schrodinger, which then allowed to, through a simple like sorting method, to show this result that supposedly disproved Einstein, without understanding what Einstein was really saying, that this type of proof is no longer science.